The following podcast is brought to you by the Johners Podcasting Network, found exclusively at WrestlingWithJohners.com. Hello and welcome to the latest live episode of Wrestling with Johners, episode 319, if I'm not mistaken. Have been known to lose count before, but a terrific Wednesday evening, and we've got a terrific guest, none other than one of the longest reigning UBW Young Lions champions, the ULT, Josh SPICER. Josh, great to have you on Wrestling with Johners. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing brilliant. How about you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Even better now that we've got you on the Wrestling with Johners podcast, a guest that I've been looking to get on the show for a long time. We've met backstage at shows and it's finally happening. So we will, over the next hour and 15, or however long this interview goes, take a bit of a deep dive with the ULT, Josh SPICER, talk about recent happenings. He had a very interesting weekend, and we'll talk about that very, very soon. His epic Young Lions championship reign for UBW, and so much more, But for anybody that may not be too familiar with Wrestling with Johners and want to check out some of my recent interviews, just a quick reminder of some of my recent guests. Certainly in the month of August, I had KM Lane come onto the show, and not forgetting the current Rev Pro British Undisputed Heavyweight Champion. I think I got all that right in the right order. Michael Oku, of course, for episode 315. And then the Flynn Daddy, Flynn Burden, joined us for episode 316. That was a really fun and maybe slightly weird conversation with Flynn Burden there. Bringing us back down to earth, we had Francesca a couple of weeks ago join us on the podcast. Regular ring announcer, MC for Rev Pro, Southwest Wrestling, Evolution Wrestling, and so many more. But that was a really fun interview. Last week, we interviewed Simon Quest. And I'm sure somebody that Josh knows from United Wrestling, but we spoke to Simon about being the current interim champion at CPW, Cornish Pro Wrestling, and of course the new number one contender at United Wrestling, as well as being the heavyweight champion at Evolution Wrestling. We've also had recently, I think probably in the month of August, the Saviour, Tony Sin, somebody that Josh knows very well, and I'm sure he's going to come up in this conversation once or twice. But up and coming interviews this coming Friday in just 2 days' time. Episode 6 of the Legends Masterclass series drops with part 1 of my interview with Mal Sanders, a 35-minute conversation with Mal. There's going to be another 35-minute conversation consisting of part 2, which will be dropping in a couple of weeks' time. But don't miss out part 1 of my fantastic interview with a British wrestling legend, Mal Sanders, dropping this Friday. And next Monday will be my next live interview with Dave Sharp, the owner, the founder, the head coach of British Kingdom Professional Wrestling, and formerly 4FW, of course, based in Swindon, and of course Brit King Pro makes its return to the Squared Circle with its first show in January next year. So we'll be talking all about that. I'm taking a deep dive into all of that, and the Brit King Pro Dojo. And of course, we'll also be having a little bit of a reminisce about 4FW, which was certainly one of the first indie promotions that came onto my radar. But today, it's all about this guy here, the ULT, Josh SPICER. There he is, bursting his way out. And of course, there's a picture there with the UBW Young Lions Championship. But first of all, we spoke a bit off air before we went live, Josh, and thinking about the last year and a half in particular, where you've certainly kind of come onto my radar and a lot of other people's radar, and certainly for that epic Young Lions title reign, which we'll talk in great detail very, very soon. But in a nutshell, if you could sum up kind of the last year and a half, where you've really kind of exploded onto the scene, branched out and done some amazing things, how could you possibly sum up your experience of the last year and a half or so?
I can only really say just better. Like sort of the from before lockdown to after lockdown, especially in the last year as well. Just the main thing I wanted this year was just hopefully we can match what I did last year, and already it's surpassed that. So like I can only really just say it's gone miles better than I could have ever expected it to. Yeah. Just feel like I've sort of I'm starting to creep on to sort of reaching that slight new level almost, where it's like everything's coming a bit more gradually to me, and everything's sort of like pieces are starting to go together, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can't. I don't think I really have a single word other than that. It's just everything has started to click, I feel like.
Well, this is it, and the growth has been phenomenal as well. Certainly from when I first saw you, and I'd say through 2022, sorry, into 2023. I think you've probably seen a massive growth in yourself as a professional wrestler, as a character, as an overall performer. And you probably feel more confident as an overall performer today than you ever have done.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed most about myself is just sort of everything within a match or everything within a show is just starting to click a bit more, and I'm sort of don't want to say I don't get nervous for stuff, because I still definitely do, but sort of I have that self-confidence more than I ever did before. Because go back to the start of last year, end of last year, it was very much of more things are coming, but it's like cool, there's bits that can be improved on, and there still are obviously always bits that can be improved on, but it's very much like I have a lot more self-confidence in what I can do now, and I feel like I know a lot more about myself and how I can sort of perform and sort of how I can wrestle, which is a really nice thing to be able to sort of know about yourself, about how well you can do, and I guess sort of knowing not necessarily your limits, but sort of your self-expectations, and sort of not necessarily putting too much pressure on yourself to really like overachieve. Like, if it doesn't go a certain way, I'm not going to really beat myself up as much as I would used to over it, because I sort of know where I'm at now.
Yeah, you've got a lot more confidence in your own ability, and you seem to be kind of enjoying where you're at and enjoying what you're doing out there a lot more than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really attribute that to sort of the last, I would say sort of from sort of January this year. I think this year, sort of the last year, 2022, was very much like, cool, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go wrestle. And that's very specifically what I did. I was very much a guy that went and wrestled. But really, I think the last 9 months, I've definitely sort of found my footing and sort of my confidence and my personality within. I can feel like I can express my personality way more within the confines of a wrestling match than I was before. Because it just sort of, I guess it just comes down to that comfortability of being able to sort of express yourself within the confines of it without, just feeling embarrassed or just feeling like, oh, if I do something like this, it's going to be ridiculous. But at the end of the day, the whole thing's ridiculous. So it's hard to be like, oh, I'm going to make myself look silly. Like, especially after last weekend, like I feel like I've got over that completely.
Absolutely. And of course, we are live. So if anybody watching at home wants to get in touch with the show, you can do. If you want to send your questions through for Josh Spicer, please do so. Send them through to us using your chosen device. They'll ping through to us, and we'll do our very best to bring each and every one up on screen during the course of this interview. And I've had a number of questions come through already. One quick reminder for anybody watching at home via Facebook Live, please go to StreamYard.com/Facebook. That's StreamYard.com/Facebook. The details are running along the bottom of the screen. Once you go to that website, it will automatically allow us to see your icon picture and name up on screen. Unless you do that, it will just come up Facebook user, and I have to flick between this and Facebook to see who sent in the questions. So that will be really, really good for the aesthetics of the whole video, and it will allow me to just to relax and enjoy the interview with my guests here. But yeah, please send your questions in for Josh Spicer. And you mentioned it, you alluded to it just a moment ago. We've got to talk about this, how your weekend started. And of course, Wet Cake Pro, Wet Cake Pro 2. Now, I was on Wet Cake Pro, the inaugural show last year, and this year I think last year you were just a spectator, weren't you, Josh? And
so
tell us about that experience, because that was easily inside one of my top 5 shows of the whole year. It was absolutely bonkers, but just it will be a show that will live with me forever. But just your kind of fond memories of last year, first of all, as a spectator, as a fan.
Yeah, so I think coming into that, I'd only done maybe 1 or 2 sacrifice shows, and I had no idea what Wet Cake was, but since knowing the sort of the genesis of it from Hustle, sort of started to sort of see the match promotions come out and be like, no idea what this is, but immediately was like, I'm on board with whatever it is. I think actually, I don't think we spoke much, but I think that might have been the first time I'd met you, because I remember I want to say you were dressed as John Cena.
Well, no, well, I was actually Mini Memes. So I was the
That was it.
world famous backstage interviewer at Mini Memes. It got a bit confusing when I interviewed Big Memes, but that was interesting. But a really fun evening as Mini Memes. And like I say, one of the best wrestling shows I've ever been to. But this past Friday, you was in one of the featured matches of Wet Cake Pro 2, and you was involved in the championship match. And it's the unkillable champion Bridge versus Josh Spicer, the final form, or as we thought, and just a few pictures from that show. There we go, with that extraordinary championship bout, and Bridge. Not sure if we should call it the unkillable Bridge or maybe the Bridge,
I feel like these pictures you can only get such a big fight feel out of these pictures that you can't really get much elsewhere. Really one of those like time stood still moments.
Oh, absolutely. Tell us a bit about that. I mean, you must have been intrigued when you were first told that you were going to be part of Wet Cake, and then when I'm guessing you were told what type of match you were going to be involved in. Of course, Bridge put up a fantastic performance against Kai Payne last year, and this year Bridge was defending its title, the unkillable Bridge. So he was defending its title against yourself, the final form, Josh Spicer. But that must have been a fun experience from beginning to end.
Oh, massively! Like one of my things with wrestling is like for me personally, wrestling is moments. Like you don't remember matches a lot of the time. You remember moments. But also on the other side of that is I am a huge fan of just the silly bollocks, really, just the weird and wonderful. Like one of my favorite promotions that like for the last couple of years has been DDT in Japan, where they're always doing just ridiculous things and sort of pushing the envelope of like, you'll always see GIFs and clips going around on Twitter of like what's happened in DDT for this show and silly stuff like that. So it was really I would say probably one of the shows I was looking forward to most out of like finding out where it was, because not only was I thought this is going to be really fun, but it also felt like it has given me an opportunity now to sort of stretch my creativity in ways that I haven't quite been able to do yet, and I haven't quite had the opportunity to do yet, which is absolutely what it was. And it turned out to even be more of a sort of a creative stretch when we so I won't spoil what was the original plan, but I'll say that inflatable Roy Johnson wasn't the original pick for the team. So there was some last minute changes had to be made, which I feel like just made it all come together even better. Almost like just being able to go out there and be like, right, you don't have to stress about let's do the wrestling, let's be really good at wrestling, because like that was provided on the card elsewhere, but this was like, let's just have fun, let's just stretch our ideas as much as we can. And it really was probably one of the most enjoyable matches I've had to date, I think.
Absolutely. Let's just bring up them pictures again. And
like I said, big fight feel in that picture. I don't know.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the attire then, because I get the sneaking suspicion with everything I've kind of looked into that you are maybe a little bit of a Spice Girls fan. Obviously, you come out to spice up your life, many UBW shows, and there you are sporting the Union Jack dress made famous by Jerry Halliwell, Ginger Spice herself. I've got to say, I think you look pretty incredible. I think you pulled off the dress maybe better than Jerry Halliwell did back in the day.
I'll take that.
But interesting attire. And is that your final form? And how did you actually manage to wrestle in that dress? It doesn't look like a typical wrestling attire, Josh.
No, so I feel like for now that is the epitome of what Josh Spicer is now. That is the end goal, or at least how it can go. Surprisingly, wasn't that hard to wrestle in. It was quite stretchy, so it wasn't too bad. Moons ago used to wrestle in a suit as like an IRS gimmick, so that I've used to wrestling in weird stuff. But no, really, like it was sort of a fit of like. The idea got presented to me of like, cool, we'd like you to wrestle Bridge, and I was like, absolutely. But it's like, we don't want it just to be the same as last year where it's just wrestler against Bridge. Let's make it a bit more. And it was presented to me of like, right, if you were an anime character, what would when Dragon Ball, when they power up, it's like, what would that be? it took me a good couple of weeks to think of it, actually, of like, I originally wanted to go on that like venture of like, cool, what like anime related stuff we can go, because I like, you know, I've fan of anime and bits like that, so I really thought about it like from that aspect. But thinking more and more about it, I was like, this could, or not alienate anyone, but I was like, I don't think going that route would be the best route. So I was like, well, I'm pretty much known for the entrance music now, so let's just ham into that as much as possible. And I was like, brilliant, let's go ahead with it, because it's something we've been talking about wrestling, or not necessarily wrestling in the dress, but it's like at some point I'm gonna do something with the Union Jack dress, and I thought this was the perfect time to do it.
There we go. Coming to a wrestling show near you, maybe. Who knows? Or maybe
Yeah.
just save it for wet cake shows. But I mean, it was utter batshit crazy again for the
Absolutely.
second year. You had Truman Roswell clones. You had Stone Cold ET and Undertaker ET. You had Act 2049. It's just, I'm sure, just like the first show, which is available on Sacrifice Pro's YouTube channel, I can't wait for this one to drop. Like I say, I wasn't able to make it this past Friday. I can't wait to see it when it drops on YouTube. And then the very next day,
so I would say,
go on, please carry on.
No spoilers for Wet Cake, but it is the only show I've seen so far that has had 2 fatalities.
No, well, I can only imagine that one member of Bridge probably got his comeuppance, but
no,
anyway,
so much fun.
You'll have to watch it to find out, of course. And then the very next day at Hitchin Town Hall was the phenomenal 10th anniversary show for UBW, and another show I was gutted I couldn't get down to, and unless the card changed, I believe that you were part of this 5-way gauntlet elimination match. And another match there. I mean, you got Arthur Scurro there, Ricky Calvey, yourself, Jackson Hart, and RJ Singh, of course, a legend of the British wrestling business. We're going to talk about RJ a little bit later on. But a fitting match to be part of the 10th anniversary show. You've been part of UBW for a couple of years now. From a personal standpoint, what did it mean to be a part of that show and to be part of UBW celebrating its 10th anniversary?
So in general, just to be part of the show in any facet was like a really sort of, I felt quite a bit of a privilege from sort of, I worked out, and I think except for one show, I'd pretty much been on every UBW show this year, whether that be as champion or not. But like I wish the circumstances could be better, because it sounds like you weren't aware that within the first match we had an injury, which unfortunately, what's the term, stopped the show for a good 3 hours or so.
Right.
So unfortunately, when it came to last minute, we had quite a few turnarounds. So that gauntlet match ended up becoming a rumble with the addition of Sunset Skip and Josh King. Just because I thought, unfortunately, the time we had left for what happened, unfortunately, Ian Rosario got quite badly injured, which I think he's doing quite well now. But
sending our well wishes to Ian Rosario. Yeah, we've seen all the posts. Yeah.
This is a massively unfortunate thing to happen, especially for like we had this amazing venue with help of the Hitchin Mayor Dan, loads of really cool stuff for the card, like the women's title first ever, some really like Odyssey and New Breed, and sort of like the past and the present tag match. You had Harrison Leon winning his Square One belt finally off Tony Sin, like an amazing card from start to finish, but like it was definitely hindered by that sort of setback. But it was also a testament to show how much that not only the wrestlers but everyone like backstage just really came together in sort of the moment of need, and it like by the end of the show the crowd were loving the show. So it's a really nice thing to sort of see everything come together as it did, even though there were setbacks. But it was a really nice, the premise of the gauntlet originally, I think it really showed off a really nice sort of variety of not only sort of the people who have been with UBW from like near the beginning or the long stays, people like Ricky Calvey, and then sort of your veterans like RJ, but then also you've got a taste of the very new, like Arthur Scurro, who's someone who's like accelerating at such a ridiculous rate that it's almost like envious, like he'd had a handful of matches. I still think we worked out the other day, he was still within his at least matches in front of crowds on like main shows, at least within his first 10 matches. And from watching him work, you wouldn't expect that, because he's come on so ridiculously well in the time that he's been doing it. It's incredible to see. But yeah,
Absolutely.
like the show itself, like I said, with its setbacks was unfortunate, but it really did come together to be quite a nice show, especially with the Hall of Fame at the end for Paul and CJ. It was a really nice come together in the end, which I think it's a testament to show that how important on a show not only the workers are, but everyone behind the stage, from people on merch, people on sound, filming, everything like that. It really sort of almost brought everything together as sort of like how cool. This is a very tidy unit of how to put on a show.
Yeah, and a real celebration of UBW and like I say, what they've been able to achieve over the last 10 years, and they've created some of the biggest characters on the UK scene, some of the best wrestlers on the UK scene as well. And I've got this picture as well, which I think is from Saturday, and that appears to be Jackson Hart kicking you square in the jaw there. And I think that Jackson appears to be making a little bit of a habit of super kicking you. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think you may have had a match earlier on in the year, the two of you, but I think this is is this gearing up for something else between the two of you? He certainly thinks so by the looks of that super kick.
I hope so, because pretty much since I've lost my belt at UBW, I've been on a really shit losing streak. Not gonna lie, it's been pretty hard. Like we had my street fight with Vinny Cray, and then the next sort of opportunity was with Jackson, and I was like, cool. I did ready to get back on the horse, and it didn't pan out that way. And then the immediate show after, I was meant to wrestle with Kamikaze, and unfortunately that didn't plan out. So as a last minute, it's like, cool, I'm going against Jackson again. So within almost 2 weeks, I'm like wrestling him again. So it's like, cool, I can get back at him, get some sort of level it up. And whether it was I got into my own head or whatever, just it fell apart again. And now it's sort of becoming this a bit of an annoyance at the moment, where I can't really shake him in any sort of way, even in a rumble. Like he's like, I was fairly confident I won the rumble, and then he creeps out of nowhere, kicks me in the face, and I'm on the floor. But
yeah, there's got to be some comeuppance somewhere down the line. I'm sure that there's an additional chapter to be had between the two of you. I know, I can tell by your voice, you certainly hope so.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I ended the night on a high, because I quite frankly had enough. So I maybe not the most favourable thing to do, but I got back in the ring and chased him out of the venue.
Good.
And then I've also, again, can't escape him at the moment, because I had, in between those matches, I also wrestled him at Jurassic over in Essex. And then I know he is now one of the other people that's qualified for the breakout division final in Ignite. So it's a lot of Jackson Hart for me.
You can't escape him.
I cannot escape him at the moment.
Let's talk about the UBW Young Lions Championship then. And I've got a few pictures here of you kind of holding the championship, albeit after kind of a hard-fought match, I'm sure. But you were the Young Lions Championship for, now correct me if I'm wrong, and excuse the dogs making noise in the background, 307 days. So an amazing reign. Now I worked out, I think that's officially the second longest reign, but behind Smashing Mike. But then maybe a year and a half of his reign was during COVID. So I would probably put you top of that list. I don't know if you'd agree with me, but absolutely. If you take away the year and a half that he didn't defend it because of COVID, then I think that puts you top. But 307 days, nonetheless, is a fantastic achievement. I talk about some of the title defenses you had, but a real epic run. And I think that championship helped to make you to start off with. And then by the end of it, I think you were elevating the championship. But in a nutshell, tell us about your feeling towards that championship and your reign as a overall thing.
Yeah, because it's one of those things that I'll look back quite fondly now, because I feel like you said at first, I feel like it was like I've given this opportunity, this belt, that it really puts me on a platform now to where I've got to sort of, it's, put up or shut up sort of thing. Like it's either going to end really well or end really poorly. And I think it, like you said, towards the end, it was sort of, by the end of that reign, I'd really sort of felt I'd come into my own as a performer and as a wrestler. Like I gave me the opportunity to work with some people sort of people I'd worked with already, but in a different capacity, but then also people that I'd not worked with before, and it sort of elevated it to like, cool, we're going to have this title match. It's got to be, you know, like almost the opposite of the wet cake stuff. Is like, cool, this is where we're sort of, you know, show the wrestling side of it. But no, yeah, I think because I couldn't have told you much about the history of it before lockdown, the Young Lions, but I worked out the days that I'd held it for, and then sort of one thing I was quite proud of was that I'd known from lockdown onwards it was the longest. I think now almost surpassed by the Odyssey's tag team title reign. It was the longest title reign of sort of, I guess, the post-COVID era of UBW, wow. Which I was like, that's without even realizing it until it ended. I was like, I'm really proud of that.
100%.
And like, I think that was my favorite thing about it, is it just gave me this opportunity to work with so many people that like every time I wrestled, it almost on a steps of just like every match got better, or I was learning something new every time, and it really sort of helped sort of, like I said, earn that confidence that I'd sort of been lacking at the time.
Absolutely. And let's go through some of your title defenses. So we'll go through it in chronological order, and feel free to step in here. But obviously you won the championship over Hustle Malone on August the 28th last year. And we'll talk more about him and that match very, very soon. I think you said that your first defense was probably a week or so later against Ricky Calvey. And then you had a match against, I think that's Josh King. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that's Josh King.
Josh King. Other title defenses of the Young Lions title included Memes in October. And then we're going to talk more about this match in a minute. Tommy Kyle at Into the SPICER in November. Aidan White also in November. Then you had a tag team match, still as champion, of course, but against the Progressive Overload alongside All Chill Charlie. Your next title defense was in March against RJ, and then you had Murdoch in April, and then 3 Become 1 along with the Odyssey, of course, against Overload City and Vinnie Cray, the man that eventually dethroned you as the Young Lions champion. That was in May. And another defense against Otto von Lumbergast. I think I've pronounced that terribly. And then Paul Hubris in June. And then, of course, the match where he lost the championship, Cray City Street Fight in July. I think I worked that out to be about 10 or 11 title defenses. That's not too bad, is it? And like you say, it was an epic reign, but not many people get half a dozen championship defenses under their belt before losing it. You had nearly a dozen, so congrats, my friend. But a great list of names to be proud of that you defended the title against.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it really is like a who's who of sort of, I guess, what feels like UBW's past and present as well. There's like I said, some of the first matches were some like regulars, sort of like I said, Ricky Calvey, Tommy Kyle, and then for Hustle, but then also some of the newer guys as well, which was quite nice to sort of, I guess, almost show, I guess, I would say my veteranness, you know. It was nice to sort of like work with people who were newer than myself, but then also have, like I said, with that confidence of like, okay, this is a different dynamic to what I'm used to, as opposed to sort of being like the wrestling with people that I'm very much sort of like behind in terms of sort of how long we've been working. So it was a really nice sort of, you know, juxtaposition of not every match was sort of, it's just this, you know, handful of people different. It felt quite varied as sort of what was nice about it.
Good range of experience levels and years in the business for sure. But we started that list with your match August the 28th last year when you won the UBW Young Lions Championship against Hustle Malone. And I don't know whether you knew on the day, but you certainly, I think we all found out afterwards that would be Hustle's final match, certainly for now. And I think he certainly intends for it to be his final match. And there's a picture of the two of you after the show. We'll talk more about the T-shirt in a minute. That must be a bit of a bittersweet kind of memory for you, a bittersweet moment for yourself, because like I say, getting the opportunity to wrestle Hustle and to wrestle for the championship and to win the championship from Hustle, and then to realise that you had actually been his opponent in his final ever match. How does that feel, kind of on a personal level?
It was interesting to, like, because Hustle's one of the sort of, I feel like, the people that at the time that were around, he was one of the few people that I'd known from UBW, but I'd also known him from stuff he'd done before lockdown. So he was very much a name I knew, which was really sort of, personally for me, quite cool to be like, cool, I'm getting to wrestle one of these like names, like a named person on the scene. But no, like to have not only his final match, but to win the belt from him was really cool, because I'd not really known him that long from that point. We'd sort of had interaction sort of, I think around that time as well. I'd started sort of showing face at sacrifice shows, just helping out, bits like that. But no, it was really, really good, and still probably, I'd say, top 3 matches that I've had like ever, just in terms of, he's got such a, like, I feel like one of the things that's underrated about Hustle is he's got such a brilliant mind for wrestling that I don't think is appreciated as much, because the whole thing, if you watch the match, we essentially, actually, I think it might be annoyingly one of the matches where the footage is a bit dodgy on it, but we essentially, because we'd not really interacted beforehand, so it's like, well, how do we make the people care about this match? As like, we essentially tried to fit an entire feud into like a 15-minute match, sort of, and it really did work, and that was all credit to him. Just sort of, he knew what people, like, he knew the expectations of the crowd, he knew how we would get them in certain places, and it really turned into one of these matches, you know, where we started wrestling, he got himself counted out, the match was restarted, he got himself DQ'd, the match was restarted, there was interferences, there was weapons by the end. It was one of the most fun matches I've had, and it really sort of a testament to him himself of just how much he gets wrestling, and I think how fun you can make wrestling even in those like intense situations.
Yeah. And made even more special the fact that I think that was probably your very first championship that you won that day. Yes, that must have been, I'd say, a really cool moment for you, and a bit of a thrill on the drive home.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, like, as much as people sort of, like, you know, they're a bit humble about it, everyone wants to win the belts at the end of the day. Like, that's the fun thing. That's the cool thing. It's cool to have the belts. But yeah, like, massively, it was such a sort of, when I was told about it prior, it was such a sort of like a, because realistically, I hadn't been in UBW that long from when it, like, I think my first match on a proper UBW card was the Mimia that year, which was, I think, around January time. So only like 6 months later, I'd had this opportunity, which like took me completely by surprise. And then, like I said, to not only wrestle Hustle for it was like really sort of jarring of like, I'm not sure if this is actually happening until it happens, sort of thing. So, but yeah, just to have all that involved, you know, win first belt on like a promotion like that is really, really cool. Because I like, obviously with UBW, you've got like the Square One and everything like that. So it's like, it was almost felt like a bit more of an honor that they'd sort of had, I guess, confidence in me to go like straight away. It's like, cool, we'll straight here's the belt from one of the main shows. So I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like I was really massively cool, sort of surprised by it.
I think this is a picture from that very same day when you first won the championship. Is that right?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
And I've got to say that's probably my favourite picture of you with that championship. Just the raw emotion. Yeah, just feels like you've accomplished something that you've been chasing for a long time. Now, one thing that kind of really struck me before that match, and it reminded me when I was doing my research, was the promo that occurred before the match. Now, it was probably a little down the line when I put two and two together, and I realised that the promo was actually about you, and it all into place. And but it wasn't your typical Hustle Malone promo where
no,
I'm going to rip your head off, you know, Sonny Jim. And to demonstrate that, I've actually got the promo. So I'm going to play it for our viewers to demonstrate exactly what we're on about. Here we go.
Josh Spicer.
Joshua.
It's me, Spider-Man. And I think you're a bitch.
I'm here to smash your capitalist ass.
You have a poor credit rating and your beard is drawn on with a pen.
your diagnosis just came back in, and I'm a little worried, okay? It says here that you are extremely stupid, okay, and can't dance, and also are a big loser.
At UBW, Hustle Malone will kick you in the back.
Josh Spicer, Hustle Malone will defeat you and physically steal your birthday.
You thought I wouldn't find you? I found you, you stupid boozer.
I tasted his food once and it was bland. Pew!
You will never get your oily hands on the Young Lions Championship. Hustle will use it as a pastry coaster. Probably forever.
Josh Spicer, leave my goats alone.
He is such a big loser. Always a loser. A loser. A loser.
You can't dance. You're awkward as hell.
Hustle gonna crush you. Please retire immediately.
When I hear your name, I really lose control, you idiot.
Also, you're a little baby man. Did you know that? Did you know about you being a little baby man?
Lights.
Camera.
Hustle.
Still to this day, one of the best and funniest promos I've ever seen. When it first came out, when it first got dropped on Twitter, I think I must have saw it back about 15, 20 times, and it made me laugh so much. What was your first reaction when you first saw that kind of very imaginative promo package? Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, I can give a testament to how long lasting that is, because while you were playing it, I could hear my dad downstairs just cackling at it the entire time. But no, it was one of those things where. So the awkward thing about it was at the time I was on holiday, so I very much sort of wasn't really on socials much, and just had sort of like Twitter notifications just piling up, and I was like, unless I've done something stupid, I don't know what this is about. and then I saw it, and I must have watched it 10, 15 times, just back and through. And I think again, it just shows a testament to how creative Hustle is and sort of the mind he has. That it was. I went back and forth with it, and I messaged him being like, first of all, you're a prick. The second, like, I don't know what to, because I was like, I found it hilarious, but I was like, nothing I can do to respond to this will be a fraction of how good that was, and anything I would have responded with would have just made me look a bit silly. So I was like, at that point, I've just sort of got to swallow it and let it go. But it was still, I think, one of my favorite promos that I've ever seen to this day. And I think, like I said, it just shows how creative Hustle is. And I feel like it's stood the test of time. A year later, it's still ridiculously funny for what it is. It's really, really good.
I still don't know how he could possibly physically steal your birthday. I don't know whether that's true. Like I say, best promo, I think, in a million years. Absolutely loved it so much.
I'm just glad I didn't lose, otherwise he would have stolen my birthday. Like, at least we'll never know. That's the thing.
Oh, brilliant. One title defense I want to talk about in particular, and it was at a show named after you.
Yes,
Into the Spicerverse, November the 5th last year. One of your first title defenses, we kind of briefly mentioned it earlier, but it's against Tommy Kyle, one of the coaches at UBW Square One, of course. And I watched this match back in preparation for this interview. And I must admit, I did wince once or twice when I saw the match back. He laid it in. He kind of didn't hold back, did he? He wanted you to know, if you're coming in the ring with me, Young Lions Champion, I'm going to make you regret that decision, and I'm going to take that championship off you. And he didn't take that championship off you. You had a fantastic match. I think the match went nearly 20 minutes. And I absolutely loved it. What are your memories of that match in particular with Tommy Kyle? Do you still feel the thuds to this day?
I don't remember much of it, because if you've watched Tommy Kyle wrestle, he's a very quick, very sort of snappy wrestler. And I just remember being exhausted the entire time. And obviously, like I said, he lays it in. He makes himself known. He's in the ring. But that was quite a special one, not only because it was got a show named after me, which again didn't expect at all. But then when I was told about the show name, I was like, oh, brilliant! Not only do I get a show named after me, but it's also named after one of my favorite films as well. So I was like, this is really cool. But then, yeah, to wrestle Tommy himself he's someone sort of, since I've been going to Square One, he's someone who I've very much looked up to, and just sort of not only him as a performer, just as a person in general. Like he's one of the best on the scene, and I don't think many people disagree with that. Like I feel like he's almost a bit hidden still as well. I think he's obviously, since his leg injury, he's had to have a setback, but really I think he's now starting to pop up a bit more. Like he's been on Riot Cabaret, which I feel like is one of the big ones in the scene at the moment. I feel like he's starting to get his due a bit more. But yeah, it was for me, it was like this is the match where like I've got to sort of show that I can hang with the sort of the higher ups on the card, and sort of like the people who are at the next level, and really like that's what it felt like. And it definitely shone a massive light on how my cardio is, because like I said, I was heaving by the end of it.
Oh yeah, and after being in the ring with someone like Tommy Carl, you're only going to get better, aren't you? You're only going to improve.
Exactly.
Yeah. But a phenomenal match, definitely a match you can kind of look back on and be proud of for sure. Another match that I'm sure you can look back on and be proud of, and I think we mentioned this earlier, from March, and it was your match against the King, RJ Singh,
Yes.
another Young Lions title defense. Easily a standout performer on the UK scene, a legend of
absolutely,
from the last 20 plus years. I had him on the show about a year ago when we had a fantastic conversation. I've bumped into and spoken to RJ many a time at shows, on backstage interviews with him. But once again, as part of your epic Young Lions Championship run, you got to defend your title against the King, RJ Singh. First of all, a legend. So there might have been a few butterflies before you went through the curtain, but tell us your overall experience of wrestling him and your title on the line.
So that was one of the, like, say, similar to the Tommy Carl match, that was one of the matches where I was asking the promoters at UBW, I was like, this is one of the matches I want. This is, you know, if I lose this belt within the next week, at least can I have this match before it? This was like, usually I'm quite easygoing with what I come with them, but this was really the, like, right, this is what I want. But it ended up being quite, for me at least, quite a special match as well, because I was about, I say 2012 time, I was really getting into the UK scene. Sort of quite locally to me was now the sort of the former Southside Wrestling, who were like sort of a staple of that era. And I remember my dad took me to a show once, again, I think it was about 2012, if not 2013. And funnily enough, RJ was on that card. So 10 years prior, I'd watched him wrestle in like a little hall down the road from me. And now 10 years later, I get to wrestle him myself, that was a massively special thing for me. And again, just to be able to be in the ring with him is a massive learning experience. And he's someone now I've got to know quite well, and someone sort of can always sort of go and chat to and just sort of ask for feedback, ask for information, that sort of thing. It's really, really cool for that. And like from the title reign is definitely sort of the one more special moments out there for sure. Like just personally for me at least. I think even like I had a chat with my dad about it afterwards, and he was very much, he thought it was really, you know, again, just 10 years ago, I watched him wrestle live, and then 10 years later, I get to defend a championship against him. Was like still really one of those calls. I don't think I'm really over it still. Even now, I'm like, it's just really cool.
Yeah, I can totally get it. Like I say, it was a 300 plus day reign, 10, 11 title defenses. What we've only kind of touched on a couple of the matches there. Are there any other kind of standout moments or memories from your Young Lions Championship reign that you're really proud of, that really kind of, you know, will live with you for the rest of your days?
Yeah, so one of them, the matches I remember enjoying a lot was the match with Josh King, because that was one of the first like matches I felt like, okay, I feel like while I was actively in the ring, okay, I felt like I've improved. As things were going on, I was sort of like feeling out a bit more, and everything just sort of felt like it was clicking a bit more while I was wrestling. I was like, this is starting to make more sense in terms of sort of feedback people have given me, and sort of I feel like I was actively feeding back on it. But yeah, there was one, I can't remember now if it was a title match or not, but on one of the Square One shows, I got to wrestle Aiden White in one of his first matches. And that was, again, another quite cool to be like, I'm sort of the more senior guy getting to wrestle one of the newer guys. So it was a really cool, like sort of I guess best way to say it is almost like this is sort of I can lead competently sort of thing.
Yeah.
In something like that, which was really nice. But and that's a testament to Square One in itself, that I've been sort of now. A year ago, I was given these opportunities to, like, you know, you're new to here, like, you get these matches, but now I'm sort of like on my Square One matches. It's very much I'm getting to work with the newer guys and sort of show them through like sort of their first couple of matches, which is really cool. But just as in general, like all the matches like had a level of specialness to them. Just the fact that it was my first title reign at like a big promotion, that I was featured heavily on every show, sort of, you know, for a good stint. I've almost a year in a row I was on pretty much every UBW show. It just really felt like I was coming into my own as not only a champion, but just as a wrestler as well.
That's a hell of an accomplishment. And one match that we touched on earlier was this one here, 3 Become 1 versus the City, Overload City, my apologies. And we did have a question that came through from a certain Chris Mark. I don't know if you know the guy.
Oh, no, I don't know.
When can we run a 3 Become 1 reunion tour, Spicer?
Oh, mate, whenever.
So known as Adonis Payne watching us. Thank you so much. Remember to go to streamyard.com/Facebook. Yeah, like I say, I haven't seen that match, but he definitely remembers it very fondly. But, reunion tour.
So I as much as my thing is the Spice Girls thing, I did not sign off on that name. That's one thing that was very much out of my hand. Was decided. In fact, 2 people in the tag team didn't decide on that name. One person decided on that name, and we didn't get told about it.
Yes, who that might have been.
Yeah, maybe the guy that wants to do the reunion tour. But no, that was in more recent matches, one of the special matches, because it was an opportunity. Because I don't really tag much, but I really enjoy tag wrestling. But it was a special opportunity to get to tag with 2 people who I've like since coming to Square One, and really just in wrestling in general, I've become really close friends with. I'd consider like 2 of my best friends. So to be able to get to wrestle with them in that capacity was just so much fun, really, really enjoyable. And like, you know, I can sit here and tell you how good the Odyssey are, but you can see how good they are. The opportunities and the matches they're getting, like, you know, the upcoming United show against Lana and Rob Drake and Crowley and Alexis, it just shows how good they are. And just to be able to get to work with 2 of your closest friends in that sort of situation is just so much fun. I think it shows, if you watch the match, just sort of how much fun we're having. It really is one of those matches where it's going to be one of my favorites, just because I just remember enjoying the entire thing from start to finish, just loving it. Really, really fun.
And for my money, the Odyssey are the best tag team in the UK. I'm going to go out on a limb and say it here on the Wrestling John's podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
I've told them face to face. It was them and Act 2, and I said, look, I've got my top 1 and top 2 tag teams in the same room. And what a match on to United.
See, I feel like if Jack Nuxton wasn't such a terrible person, then Act 2 would be slightly better. But because he's the worst person ever, it's obviously the Odyssey.
Absolutely. And also to kind of commemorate your Young Lions championship reign, you had a comic book made as well.
Yeah.
The amazing Spicer Man. And like I say, awesome artwork. You'll have to kind of fill us in on who did all this, but on the inside covers, it did kind of document some of your championship reigns as if it was a Marvel or a DC comic. Very, very impressive. Very, very cool as well. Tell us a bit about it.
So it something, again, wasn't told about before and completely by surprise, but there's quite a dedicated group of, or I say group, a pair of people that come to UBW shows, and they're now the Wrestling Outsider. And for the longest time, they would do these sort of like almost little like news guides with like, you know, sort of really well done drawings of the show, like this is what to expect sort of thing. But to get that sort of like comic book, in fact, I've got it framed up over there because of how cool I think it is. Like, it was such a like, oh, this is really cool. Like you know, for selfishly, for a lot of wrestling, like you know, wrestling is you do it because you love it, sort of thing. And like, I never really expect to get much of anything like that. Like, it still shocks me when someone buys a T-shirt, sort of thing. Like, I'm very much sort of doing it because I want to do it. But to get something like that, like that. Like even like people who've been wrestling for decades might not have had anything like that. I think it's just so cool. And it shows a level of sort of passion from the fans and how much, you know, if they're taking the time to do stuff like that, they must. it almost feels like a validation in how much your sort of the effort you're putting in is, you know, is rubbing off on the people that are watching it. Because to get something like that is just so cool. Like,
absolutely.
can't go on enough about how cool it is.
Yeah, and we'll touch on it in more detail a bit later on. But I just think that you, as a character, as a person, as an individual, and an overall performer, just you can't help but the fans have this connection with you. And speaking of that, and a nice little segue, Johners, even if I do say so myself, is the SPICER phenomenon. Tell us a bit about this, because I've watched a whole ton of your matches leading up to this interview, and there was a few guys in particular, but like I say, in general, the crowd are just really, really massively behind you. They're into Spice Up Your Life, they're into you, and like I say, everything that goes on in your matches, and of course, and I'm going to bring this up as well, it won Moment of the Year. The SPICER phenomenon was born 2022. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said it earlier, and I feel like for me, like, wrestling is moments. Like, you know, it is, you know, the one that always sticks out to me recently is, like, you know, when Edge came back from retirement. Like, I'm sure I can remember bits about that Rumble, but from that entire year almost, you remember Edge coming back, don't you? Like, that's the thing that sticks out. So, like, just to be able to sort of be up for Moment of the Year and win it is sort of another, like, thing that was quite special to me about sort of that year and that title reign. But no, it's really nice, because the two very large men that are lifting me up are two of my friends that have come to multiple shows before, but luckily they got to come to the one where I won the belt. And, like, to have a handful of friends there, that some of them are really into wrestling and some of them, you know, they wouldn't know a lot about wrestling, but they still came and they enjoyed it, is really sort of like what validates what you're doing. Is because, like, you can take someone who doesn't know anything about wrestling, but you can put them in front of a local wrestling show and they're going to enjoy it, sort of thing. But yeah, just to be able to have that is really good. Like I said, I like it for the moments, and the fact I got to win Moment of the Year is sort of like a bit of validation for me, I guess, like in terms of my philosophies with wrestling, which is quite nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Some really cool moments. Tell us a bit about your wrestling fandom then, because I get the feeling, I mean, we'll talk about this in more depth in a moment, but you actually started your wrestling career at a tender age, but I'm guessing that you were a wrestling fan from a young age also.
Yeah, so I want to say wrestling really crept into what being one of my hobbies was like around 7 or 8, I want to say. Because before then, never really took a look at it at all. Like, I was into all sorts as a kid, you know, like diehard Robot Wars fan. For anyone that watched Robot Wars, love me a bit of Robot Wars. But wrestling really only came into sort of my scope when I went round a friend's house after school one day, and he's sort of like, "Oh, I've got this game," and it was, I think, SmackDown versus Raw 2006, and I'd not really known anything about wrestling, so I was like, we played it, really enjoyed it. And then it was like, I just played the game loads, and then I started watching it. And I think around, I want to say, I remember watching most as a kid around 2007. Because for me, sort of my, I guess, fondest period of wrestling to look back at is sort of like from the 2007 Royal Rumble to WrestleMania 23. Sort of that period where, you know, you had Michaels and Undertaker in the final of the last two. And then it led up to that, what I think is, looking back on it fondly, a really good WrestleMania. It has its low points, don't get me wrong. Like, you've got, like, Kane and the Great Khali was not particularly a great match, but you had great matches like Cena and Michaels, and like Taker and Batista, the great Money in the Bank ladder match, like probably one of my favorite stints. But
it's an underrated WrestleMania. I've got to agree with you. It's
absolutely,
an underrated Mania.
For sure. Yeah. But yeah, it was that. And then what really sort of started piquing the interest was TNA, because I felt like the only time I'd watch WWE was going to Woolworths and getting like the odd DVD, whereas it was quite hard to watch it because you know it'd be on late or you'd have to record it, that sort of thing. But I think the channel at the time was, I want to say, I don't think it was Dave, I think it was Bravo, and they would have runs of TNA, and I remember it was either, I want to say, Kurt Angle's TNA debut or just one of his entrances. But I remember watching Kurt Angle's, I think it was before I was meant to go out and play football for my local football team, because that's all young boys did at the time was that played football. And I remember just watching Kurt Angle's entrance of he had to have the slow rise draped in the American flag come out, and I was like glued to the TV, and like I was like rushed out the door by my dad because we were late, and I was like I really just couldn't think of not wanting to watch it. And from there, TNA was my go-to. Like loads of my favorite matches and favorite moments are from that era of TNA. And then I think it really progressed on sort of in the early teens. It really sort of I fell out of love with it a bit, and it's not necessarily because I didn't care for it. I think it around that period was a low point, and I didn't really have much investment in it. But then really what kickstarted, I think what got me most into wrestling and what sort of got me to start wrestling was I would every now and then, even though when I wasn't watching, I'd still be like, playing with wrestling figures and stuff like that. And I started watching these like little videos on YouTube, and there were people that were making like stop motion videos with wrestling figures. And like they were like, looking back at them, they were terrible. But as a kid, like, as like an early teen, I thought they were really cool. And funnily enough, they were all like, they were like videos with wrestling figures, but they were doing death matches. And I was like, I had no idea what I was on this. But then that started to get me onto like deathmatch music videos. And weirdly, the thing that got me back into wrestling was like CZW, like independent wrestling death matches, which then led me on to sort of like they did their best of the best, which was more like Super Junior stuff. And then that led into sort of figuring out what PWG was and Ring of Honor and all that stuff. So really a lot of my current wrestling, I guess I owe being a wrestling fan now, weirdly, is to death matches, which I've got a soft spot for. But yeah, like it really went sort of up and down in terms of my love for wrestling. But I think I really always attribute it to being sort of the video games and then like early TNA, because I feel like you look back on it and some of it is a car crash, but some of it is head and shoulders above what it should have been at the time. You look at the roster and you've got people like Joe, AJ Styles, Kurt Angle, Christian, like phenomenal card at the time or roster. And like I say, a handful of my favorite matches are from that era. I think I remember distinctly, I would probably attribute it as my favorite match was, I want to say it was like Victory Road, like 2007 or 2008. And it was the opening match. It was like a 10-man X Division, like Battle Royal. But then after the last person, which I think was Loki, came in, it then turned into an Ultimate X match. And it just, all these incredible, incredible high spots. But the thing I remember the most about that match was, it was when Chris Daniels was hanging upside down from the structure and Kazarian gave him the cutter. And obviously that was really cool. But to watch the crowd just absolutely, and it was a small crowd. It was in those like Orlando studios, just lose their mind. Like I've never seen a crowd react that way since then. Just people absolutely going crazy for it. And I was like, oh, makes it way more enjoyable when the crowd are just so into it. And I feel like with wrestling now, that is the key point. I think a good match becomes an amazing match when the crowd are invested, and a good match can be a good match, but if the crowd don't care, then like really what's the point? But I feel like that's sort of my journey with being a wrestling fan. It sort of peaked with the games and TNA, dipped a bit, and then when I found this independent stuff and sort of like going to local shows, that's really where I saw, oh, this is something that isn't just a WWE level. There's so much more to it. And I think watching local indie shows was like, oh, okay, there's something I can try here. And then when as soon as I turned 16, it was like, right, where's the closest place? And away we go, sort of thing.
Absolutely. We'll take a deep dive into all of that very, very soon. A few people that have got in touch. Firstly, Immortal Wrestling, promotion very close to my heart down here in the Southwest. Congratulations on the moment of the year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Immortal Wrestling. Thank you, Jay, for watching. And another person you may be familiar with, and Anthony Sinfield. Don't know if you've heard of the guy. Speaks also about TNA, asking what moment, match, or angle was peak TNA for you. I know that you touched on some highlights there.
Yeah.
But any other highlights or moments that really stand out to you?
I think
to answer Anthony's question.
Yeah, I think that peak sticks out the most. Like obviously, there's the really good Unbreakable 2005 match, the Triple Threat. But for me, for what I remember, it was that 10-man X Division like Ultimate X match. But then because I was in that like I guess age range, I found a lot of the really like crap Vince Russo stuff fun as well. like the prison yard match and the last rites match. As a kid, I thought that was the best. But like, you know, looking back at it, it's so campy and so ridiculous. But just, I think what got me with TNA is I think with everyone, it's just the X Division was so good. And like, you know, I attribute to Chris Sabin being my favorite wrestler. And I think, you know, Motor City Machine Guns at the time, they were just, you know, the best thing you could watch. And they really still are. Like, they're so good. But then also I feel like having an underrated like main event roster as well. Like, fair enough, they'd had their fair share of like people that had been, but even then, like I'd attribute, maybe until now his stuff in AEW was really good, but I'd attribute most of Christian's best work in TNA, and maybe to an extent Kurt Angle as well. People like that, like Samoa, you know, the originals like Joe and AJ. But yeah, I think just it had a different feel to it to WWE, which really matched what I was interested in, as opposed to what WWE was at the time, which sort of, I think after that, you know, WrestleMania sort of 23 period, it was a bit rocky, and then it took a bit of a dip, sort of come around like the latest eras of like, you know, the guest GM era, I guess, of Raw and stuff like that, which I completely skipped by. I just wasn't into it at the time, but I feel TNA was always going to have a big special moment in my heart for sure. Like, absolutely love it. Even the bad stuff I loved.
Let's talk about your kind of early wrestling career. We had a brief discussion about it before we went live, but what surprised me, and what might surprise some of my viewers and listeners, is that your career has kind of been in two halves, and you actually started your wrestling career 9 years ago, 2014. Yes. I think we agreed kind of off camera, and I'm going to bring up some pictures, and I never like to embarrass my guests, but this is an early Josh Spicer. You can see the man in the background really enjoying the action that he's seeing, and even then you were still, you know, doing some pretty sweet moves, a sweet arm drag there for sure, and some good flexibility. You mentioned that you used to wrestle in a suit, in kind of like a bit of an IRS gimmick, and there you are in what appears to be a little bit of a hardcore match. So a little bit of the CCW coming out in you there, but that was your first stint, and I think with training and performing, that was probably 2 or 3 years in total. Tell us very briefly about that first stint, and then I kind of have to kind of prelude that by saying, you know, that came to an end after a few years, and then you took a few years away from the business. So tell us a little bit about that period.
Yeah, so I like I said, I think as soon as I turned 16, like, I think my dad mentioned that he'd seen something about locally, and it was it's in Peterborough, so I'm Cambridgeshire based, and it was in Peterborough, and there was a local promotion called Full House, and it was one day just sort of messaged back and forth with the promoter at the time, who was Farron, who sort of, I think if you've been around the scene a bit, you'll know the name Farron, because, you know, he was really, at the time, one of the only guys with his own ring. So he did the ring for up and down the country, everywhere. But messaged back and forth a bit, and it was like, cool, come on down. And really, it took from it immediately. Like, the first couple of, I think it was once a week we'd do on mats, and then at the end of every month we'd use the ring. So it wasn't ring sessions all the time. But now, after a good year or so of training, is when I had my first match, and like, I was just thinking, actually, looking at some of those pictures, the gear I wrestling is like hasn't changed a whole lot. It's very black and red, and just filled out a bit more, thankfully. But it's a lot of black and red. Custom made shorts by my mum at the time, which was credit to her. But no, it was a good 2-3 years, and it was really only wrestling locally in that place. They'd maybe run a show once every 2 months or so. And really, I think at the time, I really didn't have that wherewithal to sort of branch out, because, again, being young, couldn't drive, had the ability, you know, my dad was more than happy to take me places, but really I didn't have that sort of instinct to be like messaging people and stuff, because at the time, you know, I was just like an anxiety-riddled child, you know, really like not much to know about how to make those connections and stuff. But it went on for a good 2-3 years, and I think that the pictures of the hardcore match was my sort of retirement match for the time, because it came out to a point where I was sort of struggling with the physical side of it, because I'd since I've been born, I've suffered with a condition with my chest where sort of my my ribs are so, like a normal, where's the camera? Like a normal set of ribs are sort of like that, where mine are a bit more concaved. And sort of it's something I've had with my chest for as long as I can remember. So it was down to that point where it was like, oh, I'm getting shortness of breath and like I'm getting some severe chest pains. I should probably have a look at this. So I went and had a medical exam, and they said, yeah, it's something that can be sorted. It's something that the sooner you get it done, the better, because it won't affect your life as much. But if you don't get it done and something bad happens, something quite severe could happen. So it's not great. And I think maybe at the time, I remember the first time we went and had a look up, as soon as they mentioned, oh, you probably couldn't wrestle for 2 years, immediately I was like, oh no, I don't want to do it. Like I'm enjoying this too much. And I couldn't think of not doing it at the time. But I think after a couple of months, months passed and I'd sort of, remove myself from the situation and thought about it a bit more, it was definitely sort of the right choice to do. So I ended up having that last match, which wasn't my last proper match, because I ended up the operation I was going to have got postponed a bit. So I had one more match before then under a lucha mask. And then, I had this operation, which pretty much left me with a metal bar in my chest for 2 years, which it wasn't something that, you can wrestle with, because it wasn't secured in any way. And I got told I got scared into not wrestling by the surgeon at the time. Said he'd had a similar person who do the same thing, but he was a rugby player, and he got to the end of his 2 years with the brace in his chest, and he decided to have one rugby match, and he took a tumble, and while he told me he didn't, it didn't come through his skin, he showed me a picture of very much the bar had shifted and it was very much sort of sticking out of him, which I was like, not taking any chances with that. Like, I can only imagine with a rugby match as like, it's more rough than like a wrestling match, it's probably end up worse. So I had my 2 year stint with that, and it was, luckily I stayed involved in wrestling as much as possible. I'd still go down to training and watch, sort of at the time as well, at that local promotion, a quite well-known high flyer by Joe Lando was getting his foot in. So I would always go down and we'd talk and chat and still obviously keep in touch all the time. He's one of my closer friends. So it helped me sort of stay grounded within wrestling while I wasn't there. And then as soon as that was finished, it was like, cool, right, I'm out the races, let's go. So I found out that while Full House had stopped doing training, in Leicester Elevation, Joe Connor's promotion was doing training. So I went up there with J.K. Roberts, who was, again, probably my first proper friend I've made in wrestling. And we'd really thankful to him, because he was really the one that sort of helped me drag myself to these new places. And he did the exact same thing with Square One, which I'll get to in a bit. But yeah, he started training at this place in Leicester with Joe Connors. And I trained there for a good 6 months or so to sort of get my bearings back. And then Joe sort of asked, he was like, oh, have you got gear? Have you got stuff? And I'd had stuff made by then. So like, it wasn't just in like a swimming shorts that my mum had made. But yeah, he let me on one of the shows, and I had a sort of, an impromptu tag match with some other people. And then the next week was one of the first Full House shows after a while, because they took a bit of a break. So got to have 2 matches in back-to-back weekends, which was the first time I got to do that, which was, that was cool. And then not a couple weeks after, the lockdown restrictions started coming in. So I'd essentially gone from wrestling for about 3 years, had a 2-year break because of this operation, had about, I'd say, 6 months of training, 2 matches, and then immediately back into 2 years of just nothing. So that was really sort of a low point for sure. Like, I really found it sort of like hard to want to get back into it, because I've had these setbacks again. So yeah, it was really much like, I'll see what's about after lockdown happens. And again, JK was great. He's sort of been like, oh, there's this place in Stevenage that's got like a training facility. And I was like, oh, like not really seen much of that in the UK. And coincidentally, on the very first show I was on, both Hugo Bloom and Paul Ash were on that show. So I'd actually known both Hugo and Paul for a good number of years, just passing shoulders. So he very much helped me get down to my first couple of sessions at Stevenage, because again, at that time, really only until recently, I'd still sort of suffered with these anxiety issues of not really wanting to go to a training session by myself and worrying about not knowing anyone, or just sort of like feeling awkward and out of place. But after a couple of sessions, and a testament to how good of a trainer Paul Ash is, it really helped me sort of find myself a bit more, and it gave me that confidence to start going to these sessions. And really from there, the last 2 years, it's been all thanks to Square One, I'd have to say, because like they really sort of gave me the opportunities to get on the Square One shows, and then it came back to getting on the UBW shows. Like the first show I ever got on was the pre-show for the dark match for the Mimia of that year, which was coincidentally against Adonis Payne, who I sort of attribute to my first proper match back of I had 1 or 2 singles matches at Square One, but that felt like my first like proper match, which was quite nice. But yeah, like that's really from there. It's been fairly well, or at least more documented. I've been better at sort of being like, cool, this is what I'm doing now. Because before I was very much didn't really document a lot of what I was doing, because I was just at that age where I was just excited to be there and not really much else. So it's something I've made a note of being cool, active on social media and bits like that. But yeah, like I attribute to really 9 years of training, but really only a good 4 or 5 years of that has actually only been has been active. A lot of it was setbacks and sort of starting anew more than once, which was, I felt like when I got to Square One, it was very much give it a couple months, see if anything picks up, but if not, that's probably it for me. And I feel like that was a fair few people had that mindset in coming back of lockdown, but I'm more than happy that I stuck with it, because it's gone way better than anything I could have expected, which has really been rewarding for it. So I'm really glad I stuck with it mainly. But yeah, that's
absolutely, as are we all.
Yeah, it's
great
quite
story, incredible story. We've actually had a certain Paul Ash. I don't know if you're still watching, but he sent a question at the very top of the show. Jonas, please ask Spicer about how you first met Hugo Bloom. So you just mentioned Hugo, when you first stepped through the doors of Square One and UBW and all that, and of course he's one of he's the UBW heavyweight champion now. So congratulations, Hugo won the championship on Saturday at their 10th anniversary show. But answer Paul Ash's question there. So how Josh Spicer first met Hugo Bloom.
If you see him next, you'll have to ask him, because he tells this story with way more detail and way better than what I can remember. But it was that very first show. I believe it was my very first show, and it was a rumble. I'm fairly sure. I'd not had. I think I maybe had 1 singles match, or maybe that was my first match. So, like, again, really bad at documenting the older bits, but. He definitely wasn't called Hugo Bloom at the time. That's as much as I remember. I can't remember for the life of me what he was going by, but very much there was a Paul Ash there, you know, and he came with his trainee Hugo Bloom, and we were in a rumble, and of course I'm just massively excited to be just anywhere in a wrestling ring, you know, trying to do all the bits that I'd seen on TV and that's like that. And then Hugo Bloom makes his entrance and he steps into the ring, and as an excited young trainee, I go to meet him, and I raise up my foot, and I go to, or what I think I do is raise up my foot and, you know, go to give him a shove in the gut. But in reality, what happens is I just hoof him as hard as I can in the testicles. And for me, I felt horrendous, because he dropped to the floor immediately. Again, you have to ask Paul, because he puts detail better than it. But he said to me after the fact, or when I started going to Square One, it sounded like there was a gunshot that went off. It was that I kicked him that hard that. Like, he was down immediately. That's what I remember. He came through the ropes, and I just hoofed him. And again, like, excited trainee was just so ready to do something. And the first thing that happens is just a quick, it must have been a heavy kick to the nads. And luckily, since then, he's had children, so there was no serious damage. But for the first year of me being at Square One, I would not hear the end of this story. That, you know, 8 years ago, my first interaction with Hugo was that I kicked him as hard as I could in the nads by accident, and that's all Paul would let me remind me of, and that's all he would remind me of. So when I first got to Square One, it almost felt that there was a bit of tension, where I think he held this slight grudge over me all those years that I'd met him and just hoofed him. And I remember distinctly going back after, and he was on the floor, laying on a towel, just because he was in that much pain. And first I was like, oh, did I hit him that badly? But it quite quickly realised that, I just hoofed this guy that I'd never met as hard as I could in the testicles, which was that's pretty much that's how that started.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Well, I hope I haven't kind of brought it back out into the open. Hopefully he's not going to show you next time he sees you or make you change in the corridor. One picture I'm going to bring up, and this is a picture I brought up when I had Paul Ash on the show in December, and today actually marks the day when I can now say that I've had everybody in this picture on this show.
Brilliant.
But I feel that I owe you a public apology, Mr. Spicer, and you probably know where I'm going to go with this, because when I had Paul on the show last December, obviously you got Harrison Lee on there, Tony Sin, Paul in the middle next to Adonis Payne and then Artemis, and I couldn't place who that was on the right hand side for the life of me. Couldn't remember that individual's name. He just wasn't kind of coming to the forefront. And Paul very quickly stepped in and said, "Oh, that's Josh Spicer." I was like, "Oh, of course." And then, of course, I got a message from yourself on Instagram saying, "Great interview, Jonas, with Paul. But shame you couldn't remember my name." So a public apology to the ULT, Josh Spicer, for not remembering your name. But there we go. Just wanted to do that.
Since then, I've actually had it. I think it was at Ignite for my debut against Tommy Lawrence, where after I'd had my match, sort of, I'd put my hair up, I put my glasses on, and I had like a cap on, and I was sort of sitting by merch, and there was some people giving me sort of looks like they wanted to talk to me, but they didn't quite. They were sort of giving me off looks of like they know me, but they don't know me, and I was like, oh, maybe they're just like nervous or whatever have you been. And I was like, and then it goes on, and I took a picture with someone, and so I took my hat off, took my glasses and hair down, and then like 3 people came up to me and be like, "Oh, it's you! Like we just saw you wrestle, but like with all the with the hair tied up and the hat on, we didn't get it. So like it's not just you. So you're more than let off for that. But yeah, it's so now I'm just sort of.
I'm not the only one.
Exactly.
Brilliant. But I want to take a little bit of a deep dive into the ULT Josh Spicer persona now. We mentioned that you come out to spice up your life from the Spice Girls, and like I say, you're a very kind of personality that people really kind of attach themselves to. Very excitable personality, and like I say, getting better and better in the wrestling ring all the time. But tell us a little bit about who Josh Spicer is, the wrestling persona or character.
Yeah, so for me, like obviously you showed the picture from the earlier period of me like in the suit and stuff, and for me, a lot of people that I look up to and a lot of people who I sort of take inspiration from, they're very much sort of more, I guess, sort of, well, I'm trying to think of the term, I guess sort of like they're more wrestlers, but also they're not necessarily gimmicks, they're more personas, I guess. So some again, like people like the Motor City Machine Guns, someone like Chris Brooks is a big influence of mine, people like that who they're not necessarily dressed up in these gimmicks. And so it's something in the early stages that I pitched one thing to the to Farron at the time, and I'm not sure how, but it turned up into me being a businessman. So I was like, I was too young at the time to say I don't want to do this. I sort of just ran with it. But then very much coming back to wrestling from after the lockdown and being Square One, Paul Ash did a really good job of being like who are you sort of thing, like what gets you, and it really sort of got me thinking about bits in terms of wrestling, because you look at a sort of an amazing character wrestler like someone like Crowley, and I know for a fact that I can't do that. That is not me. He is so good at what he does that I couldn't hold a torch to that sort of thing. So it's very much just sort of like, well, let's draw on my inspirations and let's not necessarily be like a gimmick, but let's be like try and bring my persona a bit more forward. And I really wanted something to sort of tie to that. So it's at least something a bit more than just, oh, here's a plucky young baby face. He's going to do some wrestling and he's maybe going to shout, "Let's go," sort of thing. So I was very much like did a bit of looking around, and I came across the ULT thing, which is something that's attributed to a rapper I like called Denzel Curry, and his whole thing is that ULT, the moniker, is for be the best possible version of yourself, and if anyone stands in your way, you destroy them. You don't let them stop you. So it was really sort of something I could sort of attribute to being, you know, that babyface wrestler, being the best that I could be, but not letting people stand in my way. And that's sort of where it genocided. But then I think the really thing that capped it off was in December of last year was I got my first opportunity to wrestle at Jurassic Wrestling. And it was against the Odyssey. And at the time it was with Alex Echo, who at the time Ben Jones was out with injury. So Alex had a handful of people on, and Alex is one of the people that I met him at a show that I was helping out at, and he came up, introduced himself to me, and because we'd had 1 or 2 Twitter interactions, and we got on like we'd known each other forever. He's one of the people that I will always attribute to sort of being one of my closest friends in wrestling. And so we were, I spitballing ideas of like, oh, well, we're not going to be the lads. What should we tag as? So we took the SPICER thing and we went, we're going to be Spice Up Your Lads. And the obvious entrance music for that is going to be Spice Up Your Life. So we went with that, and we had a great time in the tag match with that. And then come around, do a couple more shows. And my entrance music at the time was sort of a very generic sort of cyberpunk influenced music, which was sort of what I was going for my aesthetic, and something I still do strive to do. But I'd come around and they'd ask me back for another match at Jurassic. And we were sort of just before the show, we were sorting out music, and Alex was setting up the music. He's one of the co-runners at Jurassic, and he started playing the Spice Up Your Life, and we sort of looked at each other, and then both Artemis and Adonis just both look at me and go, do it, like use that. And I was and I was like, you know what, this is my first proper time here as a singles person. Like, they've known me for that music in the last show, let's just go with it. And really I have to attribute it to those three for really pushing me to use that music, because since then, like, you can almost see a night and day difference in the person that was wrestling, because it, rather than trying to be this sort of a bit more serious, like grungy wrestler, I just sort of said, fuck it, we're just going to have fun with it. And really, since I've started using Spice Up Your Life as my music, I think you can notice from coming through the curtain to start of the match to the end of the match, I'm just not trying to be a wrestler. I'm just me having fun. And I feel like that's really, over the last year, what's hopefully endeared a lot of people towards me, of just like, you know what, I'm just going to have fun with it. And really, like, that's helped. And I think that's the biggest point in how I've come along recently as a wrestler. That's really what has helped me grow, because I've not been sort of, you know, been stressing over being like, oh, you know, I need to, you know, act tough and be cool. It's like, no, I'm just going to have fun with it. And I think like that's helped more than anything, that it's given me that like confidence and just comfortability in the ring that, yeah, I'm just going to have a bit of fun with it.
Yeah.
And just really, it's helped. It's really helped my personality shine through. And I think that is what has sort of brought people, that's endeared them to me. If anyone has, that's sort of that's the main reason I'd like sort of put it to, you know. And of course, you hear the music and everyone knows Spice Girls, you know. The mums love it. The kids don't know what it is, but they love it. But yeah, no, I feel like that's sort of the genesis of what my current gimmick is just really me having fun. And like I attribute that really to the change in music for the most part.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that really stands out to your fans and people watching you kind of in the audiences, people watching you in your matches on YouTube, is that you come across as this kind of plucky baby face, but almost like a bit of an underdog character as well, to be honest with you, because you're not always the biggest in the ring. You do quite often get beaten up and thrown around, and then I think the kind of the sweet spot is when you kind of fire up and you make your comeback, and you take that big towering opponent, roll him up, or you hit one of your finishers. But I think that element of your character, a lot of people really associate with.
Yeah, I say so as well. And it's really sort of like, again, in those early stages when I was watching the sort of, again, it was around like the 2015 era of PWG, where, you know, and sort of, again, like that era of PWG, not only that, but the black and gold era of NXT, where everyone, you know, for me at least, probably one of the best periods in wrestling there's been, just for the quality of the wrestling and the matches. So everyone was very much on those, like, you know, let's have like these crazy matches and just wrestle. And I was very much on board with that. And I think it took me sort of breaking me down with Paul Ash and like let's rebuild this and let's see what's what. Because like I said, I'm not the biggest guy by any means. Like, you know, I'm quite lanky and quite skinny, sort of. So like for the most part, there's rarely the time where I'm going to be the biggest guy. So let's sort of use it to my advantage, and let's see if we can get these sort of underdog moments. And even in times when I had my belt, even though I was, you know, shown as this competent champion, there were the moments when I'd wrestle, like, you know, the RJ Singhs and the Tommy Kyles, that I would be, you know, still having to work my way up and prove myself in those moments. And I think that's sort of, again, what helped endear me to people, and sort of what hopefully keeps people sort of interested.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about your moveset now, because I have kind of studied you in preparation for this. Moves like, for example, your pump kick, the top rope cutter, which I think is one of your finishers, the dive through the ropes, your enziguri, the shining wizard that you use, the sling blade, your running drop kicks in the corner. You even hit a pretty sweet spear, and I'm going to bring up some pictures here just to kind of demonstrate some of that. Here we go. If my size will actually work, there's an example of your spear there, of course. We'll talk more about your opponent there, Kent Nelson, but a nice little single leg Boston Crab, the enziguri that I just explained, the double foot stomp from the top rope. Wow, I could watch that all day long. Just so awesome. Your dive through the ropes, your shotgun drop kick, and of course, kicking Artemis.
One of my favorite pictures.
Wow. I'm sure she made you apologize after that match. But tell us a bit about some of their moves, because you do have this whole catalog coming together now of signature moves. And you have kind of developed in the ring, but you've become a very smooth worker in the ring and able to piece together, you know, a lot of these moves seamlessly and very, very effectively as well.
Yeah, I feel like that's one thing. A lot of, like, you can look at a lot of my moveset, and if I told you who my sort of top 5 favorite wrestlers are, you'd very much be like, oh, okay, they're from there. You know, like a lot of the foot stomps and the drop kicks and the guris, they come along from that like 2014, 2015 era of like NXT and PWG, especially stuff like I said, the foot stomp. You know, foot stomps felt like at one point they were like the super kick where everyone was doing them. But then just little bits like the slingshot spear through the ropes that Gargano sort of popularized. It's something that I did even back when I was wearing the suit. I did it once or twice, and only started using it again more recently, because it was like, oh, it's he gets his limited TV time now, so it's not something he's really doing that much. So I was like, cool, I know how I can do it. So it's an interesting move that no one else was using, at least locally at the time. So I was like, cool, let's start using that. The big one for me that I really started was like, I want this to be the move that I do, was the Blue Thunder Bomb, which I pretty much do in most matches. And it was very much I've never really been the biggest or strongest guy, but since I've sort of actively tried to invest in myself in that way, it's sort of one of those lifting moves where it's like, cool, I can get a good up with it and like a sort of a thing, but it's not a strict power move where I'm like hoisting them up with all my strength and stuff like that. And then you've got stuff like the one of my personal favorites is the rope hang neck breaker, you know, where I've got their feet hung on the rope and I spin with a neck breaker. That's something I weirdly enough, it was something I knew Chris Brooks did that I wanted to use, and then I knew that Hustle Malone did it, and then quite quickly after I retired him, I was like, yeah, I'll take that from you. I've retired you now. That's my move. But yeah, really, I feel like if you watch my matches and watch my move set, and I told you who my favorite wrestlers are, you'd very much get that. And then I think it comes from one of my top guys to watch is Tetsuya Naito, and he's one that I look up to in a way that he seems so fluid and so smooth in how he strings all his stuff together, and that's something I try and achieve. That it's not just if I do a sequence of 3 moves, it's not just like I've done one move and then another move and then another move. I very much try and string them together in the most fluid way that makes sense for how I move and how I do things. So I never want it to look like I'm just awkwardly putting 3 moves together and just hoping for the best. It's very much I want it to look like it's something that's fluid and calculated, to where it's sort of I've done these moves intentionally to string them together in that way. And then more recently, that picture you showed of the dive, that was the very first dive I'd done. And now it's something I've got more comfortable with doing. It's just sort of throwing myself out of the ring, because it's very much the first time you do it is like, oh my, like, what's this going to happen? But I've got the innate ability to quite easily turn my brain off and not think about the consequences of a lot of these things. So as it's very much a case of, as the moment arrives for me to do it, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to land on my face. There is literally no thought in my head. it's just go for it, and if it goes poorly, it goes poorly. But you can think about those consequences after they've happened. But yeah, like awesome. It's one thing I always thought of, like, and I think before I really came into sort of the mindset of like wrestling is about the moments, I was very much a move guy. I loved wrestling moves. Like, I think to this day, it's something that I haven't really tried, but something I love to do is my favorite. I'd say, if not Chris Sabin, my favorite wrestler is Chuck Taylor. And I love the awful waffle, the flipping pile driver he does, which is, again, it's just a cool move. I like cool moves, and I think a lot of people like cool moves. But sometimes you don't always need to do cool moves, which I think sometimes people don't get. But yeah, it's one of those things where I've sort of taken bits from people I like, taken bits that I've tried to make my own stuff as well, because I also do enjoy that originality. But I think one thing that a bit of advice I got from Chris Brooks himself at a seminar before lockdown was there is a lot, or that there is so little originality in wrestling now that you're going to overlap somewhere. So don't get caught up in, not stealing moves. Like, if there's someone well known for, if I'm on a card with RJ saying I'm not going to do a DDT sort of thing, I'm not going to step on feet like that, but don't get hung up on, you might do the same move as some other guy that does the same move, but he's like in a different country. Like, it's there's overlap. Everything has been done, and if something hasn't been done, it's probably something you're not going to think of unless you're one of these creative type of people. So it's one of those things where I just, every now and then I'm trying to add and move things, but I'm quite comfortable with the moveset I've got. And it's something that I found in the last year. I found planning and doing matches a lot easier, because it's like I've got now these go-to things that I can do. It's like, oh, I need this for this. Cool, I've got this handful of things in my bag that I can pull out. But yeah, it's definitely helped having that sort of refined moveset massively. And I think it's something that a lot of wrestlers kind of find it hard at first to do, because you don't really know what works for you. But after a while, and I think that's another thing that I put towards Paul Ash, is you can go to one of his sessions and be like, here's a move I want to do. And rather than being like, oh, cool, we'll do this move, he'll be like, right, why do you want to do it? How does it work for you? How does it work for your character? All these sort of things. And it really makes you think a bit more about it, rather than just being like, cool, I want to do a powerbomb. Yeah.
One move I do want to talk to you about, and you may remember it, you may not remember, I don't know, but it was a move you did at Sacrifice Pro last December when you tried the Undertaker dive over the top rope. It very nearly didn't. Well, it nearly ended in disaster, didn't it? He got caught on the top rope going over the top. But tell us a bit about that. Have you tried it since?
So I have tried it since, and almost the exact same thing happened. And as I said earlier, it's one of those things I attribute to being able to turn my brain off in those moments. But so it ended up being an Undertaker dive. It wasn't meant to be an Undertaker dive. It was meant to be, sounded sort of like senton flip. But I had got to the point where I was just in the moment and thinking about, cool, dive. That, in all honesty, I just forgot to do the flip part. So I just dove out the ring. Luckily there's a good group of lads to grab me. But yeah, it was a case of dove out the ring, didn't think too much about it, and obviously didn't think enough about actually flipping that I didn't do the flipping part, and just ended up doing the Undertaker dive, which I guess worked out in the end. But it's not something I've done since the second time I've done it, because there's a bit more of an embarrassing story tagged onto that one. But
that's right. We won't go there. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the other promotions you've branched out to.
Yes.
And firstly, we'll touch on Sacrifice Pro. And I think we touched on them very, very briefly. And of course, they're the parents of Wet Cake Pro, of course. But I think you started working for Sacrifice Pro last year, and a couple of highlights. Certainly, didn't you end up in the final two of a Rumble match? Now, let me just get all my facts here. So it was the getting down to the final two, chapter 40, wasn't it? Technically no longer part of the DCEU in January, and you entered number 7. Was it the Lights Out match, I think? Tell us a bit about that, because I think you were one of the final two with Truman, weren't you?
Yes, yeah. So I think I remember it was actually the first Wet Cake is when I sort of started, like, the Wet Cake was probably my third or fourth show I'd helped at. And sort of I was with Artemis at the time, and we ended up doing sort of the sound and music for that show. But before the show, Hustle came up to us and like really like what you guys are doing. We'd love to have you on the next show. So that was really cool. And it started with a sort of a 4-on-4, New Japan style tag match. And it's sort of bits and pieces like that until that sort of that Rumble. It was, to end up in the last two with Truman, which is, as a side note, I just have to say that Truman for me is the most underrated wrestler in BritWres. I think the fact that even though he's currently got a broken jaw and still doing better promos than most, if not the entire country, is a testament to how good he is. And I think he is vastly slept on by almost everywhere. And I think it's a shame that what's happened, but he was just sort of getting more opportunities, like a title and stuff like that. So I think once he comes back, I think he's going to be a massive force on the scene. But he's someone that even since then, and even before then, I've wanted to work with. To get those little 5 minutes there was great, but I'd love to sort of get involved in a singles match with him. But yeah, that's sort of, I feel like how that started with Sacrifice. And then I had the lights out match with Kent Nelson.
That's right. Yeah, I was getting my shows mixed up there, but when he was a big dude, isn't he? And it was for his ticking time bomb championship, where of course the match needs to be won within a 10-minute time limit. Otherwise, the title becomes vacant. But once again, you got this kind of differing size dynamic, and he's a bit of a bully boy at the best of times. But I think you held your own. I think if it weren't for Chase Anthony, you probably would have been sitting here as the ticking time bomb champion, my friend.
I think so. Yeah. I don't want to toot my own horn, but things were going that way.
It was.
But no, it's one of those matches where we got to show that again, the underdog side and very much the David sort of Goliath size difference. And it was a match where I got to do a bit more technical based stuff of being like sort of, you don't usually in a traditional match, you don't usually get the faces working body parts, but it was very much a match where I got to work his leg a bit, and I think it's the first time I got to use the single leg crab, which is for me my favorite submission move. It's like, I know Oku is a big user of it, and because it's the best submission move. Just because I think, quite honestly, I think I like it because of the name, because I really like crabs. I'll be honest. But yeah, that was a really fun match, and that was my first that was in fact my first singles match in Sacrifice. So even after a handful of shows, I finally got that singles match, and to be able to get a title match on one of these unannounced shows, and then to have it be it's against Ken Nelson, who's the Time Bomb champion, which I think the Time Bomb concept is a really cool concept as well, because it's sort of 100%. It just lets you flex that slight bit more creativity where you've got these parameters, and I feel like sometimes restrictions help flex the creativity in a way that just a regular match can't, because sometimes you have a regular match and you just have a match, but it's like, cool, you've got 10 minutes, you're against a guy twice your size, what do you do, sort of thing. So I think that's another really cool thing. But I can't say enough good things about Sacrifice. I mean, Hustle does a great job with it, and he's very much a guy who gives the opportunities to the people that are improving and showing improvement. For me, that wet cake match, as daft and silly as it was, it feels like one of the biggest opportunities I've had, because it was, one of a card full of great people and great people doing funny stuff. I got to have sort of a bit more of a spotlight, I guess, with the fact that I got to wrestle Bridge, who's this, already outstanding character in wet cake, and it was a singles match, so I got to flex a bit more of my creativity with it, which was really fun. So Sacrifice is one of the first place that I test to sort of, I feel like UBW is my home promotion, but Sacrifice was very much the first place that took a bit more of an opportunity with me. And I feel like has done a great job with also showing off more UBW stars in sort of getting us on those shows and just showing us to a slightly different crowd as well.
Yeah. One other company that I want to kind of shine a light on is United Wrestling in Oxford, and you've had a good run with them, some really good storylines. I think I first started working for United back in June, and of course it was the two Joshes. I think there was a Josh as a referee. There was a lot of Joshes going on. A lot of Joshes. That was a really fun match. And of course, Mike Baker, the acting general manager, got involved in that match. It led to this tag match here. The two Joshes, the two Josh Power Trip, I think they named on the day, versus the HR
that's
department.
What I came up with.
And like I say, a hell of a lot of fun. Tell us about your run with United, because we had Simon Quest on the show last week. done some amazing things, doing some amazing things with United Wrestling.
Absolutely.
And like I say, a big crowd favorite there. He's even got the Simon section.
Exactly.
So you know that the fans are kind of
Big
behind you when they bring out the signs for the Simon section. But it's a very unique company, a very unique venue and environment. A ton of great matches. And they always put on a great show, and you've been a part of their family for a little while now.
Yeah, so I think the last show was my third match with them, and originally I got brought on as one of they used to do sort of little pre-shows before the for sort of like VIP ticket holders to do a little show, and so I had a match there, sort of I guess like a proving ground match against two other gents, to very much then be brought in as, because at the time I didn't really know what was going on with Mike Baker, I'll be honest, so I got brought in by him to sort of as a what I thought was a testing match for Josh Fowles or Nomax at the time. Yeah. And then sort of towards the end of the match, I got caught in the crossfire of their beef, and obviously I'm respectfully not going to take too well to get in, my head kicked in by some thugs guys that he's brought in. So originally I thought me and Mike were quite cool, but obviously not. And that came to a bit of a culmination at the last show with us taking on the HR department and Arthur Scaro. So yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on with Mike, I'll be honest. But I'm in Josh's corner absolutely, and I absolutely can't say enough good things about United. Like, I've only had 3 shows there. I've been to 4 of them. Like, I went to one show prior just to check it out and see what it's about. And like, you throw the term around loosely of like, oh, I like working here, but I think United, just for its uniqueness, it might be my favorite place to wrestle, purely because they've got this unique venue. Yeah. The crowd are up for everything, and that's one thing I love. They're absolutely brilliant. Though, even on one of the shows where it's slightly smaller numbers, you wouldn't have known a difference. And quite honestly, they put together cards that everyone brings their A game. Like, even on the show before last, like probably one of my favorite matches I've watched was Aluna and Nico Angelo. They put on an absolutely blinding match, and like, Nico is someone I look up to on the scene, and Aluna is someone who I think very soon will be one of, if not the best, like, women's wrestler, if not just wrestler on the scene. I think she's coming up at a ridiculous rate. That's like, it's really cool to see. I know she had a match last weekend against Connor Mills that I've only heard good things about, and I think it's just a testament to how hard she's working. But United are doing so well at not only putting on great cards, but giving the workers opportunities to do what they want, and not in a sense of, the wrestlers are running the show, but they give people these opportunities. Like, for example, like I said earlier, on the next show with the Odyssey getting to wrestle, Crowley and Alexis, as well as Rob Drake and Lana Austin. It's like, that match spawned because someone said, oh, wouldn't it be good if we added these 2 people to the match? And there you go, sort of thing. Like, it happened. And like, you've got some really, really great characters and people. Like, the 2 matches that Scotty Rourke and Kira Kamara have put on have just been phenomenal matches. Like, and some of the people that United are bringing up are sort of their home guys. Like, you mentioned him earlier, Simon Quest. Like, I'd not seen Simon before the first United show. And for a big man, the way he moves around and sort of just the presence he has, he looks so comfortable, but he's also so fast and so good at what he's doing that, like, no wonder he's got a Simon section, because he's just every time I've seen him, he's just been one of the most impressive things. They're like, he's usually probably when the crowd's the loudest is because he's in there. Like, he's so good. I can't say, like I said, I can't say enough good things about United. They're doing so much well at the moment, or they're just doing things right, and I think that's what I like about it.
Absolutely.
They're just like I say, the last 3 shows have been so much fun, and I managed to drag some family and friends down to Oxford for them, and I managed to get my parents to come down. Obviously you want your parents' support for some of them, so if they can make it, they did. They came to the first one, and they were like, oh yeah, we're here to support you, but the shows are just really good that they come anyway.
It's
like,
hooked them in. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, like, my dad's always been, it's like, he was the one who always took me to wrestling shows, so he's always been involved in some form. But he says, you can't get enough of the United stuff, and I think it's just a testament to how good the shows are. And I would stress to anyone, just if you've got the chance, get to a United show, because they're so much fun.
Absolutely. Now, to wrap up this awesome interview with Josh Spicer, just got a few pictures I want to throw up, and
Sure.
I need to ask, what's up with Adonis Payne in some of these photos? He looks pretty glum. I know that he's not got any championships there, but look at that poor chap. Look at Diddums. Oh, Adonis, you just want to give him a cuddle, don't you? And even when he is draped in gold, he's looking all serious. But then this one, look at that photo there. And I've shown it. There's Leo Edwards there and one or two others. But that's kind of like a good crop of talent, isn't it? To hang around, to perform with, to have a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It was a weird sort of feeling because when I came into Square One, I've already had a fair bit of experience with past and present, and I know Adonis had a bit of wrestling before lockdown, but pretty much, I mean, you showed the picture earlier of us with Paul, and really, while I've sort of felt like at times maybe not necessarily as a fundamental Square One person, I sort of feel like I've come up with sort of like Adonis, Artemis, Harrison, Leon, Tony Sin. We've all sort of come up while we didn't start at the same time. We've all sort of come up through UBW together, and like couldn't ask for a better group of people really to come up with. Like I've made some really close friendships, and I think that's one of the things I've enjoyed about wrestling post pandemic is I stuck to it, and I've almost been rewarded with not only the wrestling side, but now I've got these friends who are like, they're not just the people I see at shows like every couple of weeks, they're like the people I talk to regularly on a daily basis. Like these are some of my closest friends now. Like it's really sort of like justified almost all the hard effort and work that's been put into, because I've now got these really great friendships. And not only that, with people at Square One, like I mentioned earlier, like people like Alex Echo, like I've just feel like that's almost my justification for wrestling at the moment, is being like I've just been able to make so many nice like bonds and relationships with so many cool people, and like people like yourself, all these promoters, all this stuff. It's just brilliant. Like there was a time where I'd get anxious before every show, but now I'm just so into wrestling at the moment. I just can't stop enjoying it at the moment. And in fact, this weekend I came off, I think 5 weekends in a row, which has been my busiest stint of shows, which tell me that 6 years ago when I was doing one show every 2 months, I wouldn't have thought of anything like that. Like the fact that everything is just kind of working out how it is more than I could have asked for. And I think like I said, the shows, the friends I've made, and just how everything's going, I can't not be happy with it really. Like it's really, really nice. Absolutely. And I think the one thing we can attribute your success to is hot dog costumes. Now, I think that is where professional wrestling needs to go. That is the secret, the hidden secret. And if you don't take my word for it, you can take Kevin Owens' word for it, because he also likes the hot dog as well. There you go. I think that might be my favorite wrestling picture of I want to say like 2014, 2015. I have not got enough good things to say about Kevin Owens. He's genuinely the loveliest person I've ever met. And I went up to him and asked for a signature, and he's like, "Do you mind if I bite this?" I'm like, "Yeah." And now that's one of my favourite pictures. Absolutely. We're going to ask Josh Spicer for his socials in a minute, and where we can reach out and say hi to him. But before we do, just a quick reminder of my next guest. Of course, we've got Dave Sharp of Brit King Pro, British Kingdom Professional Wrestling, joining me on Monday the 18th. Next Monday, and we'll be talking all about British Kingdom Professional Wrestling ahead of their first show in January. Of course, the Brit King Pro Dojo. We'll be talking about that, and we'll be taking a bit of a fond trip down memory lane and talk about 4FW, one of my favourite promotions when I was getting into the UK Indies. And of course, this is kind of a little bit of a glimpse of the rest of my lineup for the month of September. Of course, Dave Sharp joins us on Monday the 18th. On Thursday the 21st, I've got former WWE 205 Live announcer, commentator, and current stand-up comedian Johnny Quasto will be joining me on Thursday the 21st.
The following Monday the 25th, I've got Kamikaze joining me before he heads back over stateside. He's joining me at 8 p.m. UK time, Monday the 25th. Chris Bronson, the Stallion Chris Bronson, the current Southwest Wrestling Heavyweight Champion, will be joining me on Thursday the 28th. And of course, I've already recorded parts 1 and parts 2 of my Legends Masterclass series interview with Mel Sanders. And the first part of that will be dropping this Friday. And a fortnight from there will be part 2 just before the end of the month. But Josh Spicer, it's been awesome speaking to you. But social medias. Now, if any of my viewers or listeners want to get in touch, where can they do so? And I do have a little ticker that will be running along the bottom of the screen. Just let us know where we can reach out, say hi, and learn more about the ULT.
Absolutely. So on both, I believe, Instagram and Twitter is at ULT Spicer, and on Facebook, which I'll be honest, I don't use as much as the other two, but that is Josh Spicer on there. But no, feel free to drop a follow. I regularly sort of post in match pitches and stuff like that, or just trying to make people laugh with dumb inside jokes a lot of the time. But no, yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Honestly, like, it's been a massive pleasure to, like, you know, these sort of podcast things, you get the sort of like people asking for them every now and then. And I think before yours, I'd only done Paul Ash's and the hitting the turnbuckle one that was sponsored by Ignite. But to be able to come onto your show with, like, you know, you look at the laundry list of people you've had on here, to just be a small part of that is honestly, I couldn't be happier with it, really. And I'm just having a lovely conversation with you.
Very, very welcome. And I'm going to leave the final words to Paul Ash, who just sent us through another comment. And he says, Spicer is a model wrestler for any wrestling promotion. So if that's not enough to get him booked absolutely everywhere, then I don't know what is. But Josh Spicer, the ULT, it's been awesome having you on episode 319. And thank you so much for your time. And I'll see you at one of the shows very soon, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Take care.